Thanks, Deb, for inviting me here today, and the people from Belonging Matters. And thank you to you all. It's quite humiliating for me because I'm in the presence today of many of my teachers who've helped me a lot on this journey, and some of whom are also involved in still being my teachers for the future, whatever that holds. Forget to use this. So, just as Deb said, I was the Chief Executive of the Brothers of Charity Services, and in fact, I've worked in those services for a long time. I started there 37 years ago as an occupational therapist, having left Dublin where I was born, came to the west of Ireland and started my career with really not much idea what I was going to do, but just knowing that in my own heart of hearts, I wanted to make a difference in people's lives, and I really was looking at how to do that best. Regretfully, I suppose Ireland is a small country. As you know, it's an island. At the time, I remember when I went to Galway first, even to phone home, to phone Dublin, was difficult. You had to find a phone box that worked, and you had to be able to afford the call. And also to travel anywhere, of course, air flights were prohibitive. We had no internet, so you were very much working in the dark, stabbing away, doing the best you could, but without the benefit of learning from others. And that's why I say that today I'm in the presence of so many of my teachers, because thankfully the world has become much smaller, much more accessible, and it really is in the last 10 years since internet became available and that money became more plentiful, that we had the benefit of learning from others, having teachers come to Ireland, being able to travel away ourselves to learn how to do things differently, that actually we've been able to be more effective in supporting people to have a good life. That's just a little bit of background. So I'm just going to reflect for you on the things that have happened over essentially the last 10 years. I was appointed Chief Executive by the Brothers of Charity in late 1999. To give you an idea of how the Brothers of Charity work, they are the largest organisation in Ireland for people with an intellectual disability. So because they were so large, they decided to break the services up into 6 regions. So in Ireland we have counties, and so they basically made each county that they provided services in, they made that into its own independent region and appointed a Chief Executive Officer for each region. So you see in the background here, County Clare. I live, if you just have a look, just above the border at the north there, I live in Gort, which is right on the border of Galway and Clare. And so up until Christmas time, I was the Chief Executive and looked after the services in Clare. So when I came to Clare first, I had worked in Galway previously. By the way, if you don't understand anything I'm saying, please raise your hand or let me know. I was working earlier this year up in Mildura, and when we got the feedback sheets back later, somebody said they couldn't understand my accent, so please just let me know, or if I use any expressions that you're not familiar with. So that's County Clare. One of the people I have worked with a lot, his name is Pat, he's a photographer. So he's taken some very nice photographs that I'm going to share with you. I say my backyard because I remember when I began to meet Americans first and they talked about their backyard, I used to feel so sorry for people in America that they didn't have a garden like we had ourselves. So I'm showing off our own scenery at home. So just to talk a little bit about the organisation I work for and the type of services that have been provided there. Basically, we've talked this morning about congregated, segregated settings. So when I came to Clare, people, by and large, attended a large sheltered workshop. at the time, the workshop served 110 people. The type of work that went on there was industrial sewing. There was a garden. There was, we made altar breads for the diocese. So lots of various work activities. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And people lived in group homes. I'd worked previously in Galway, where you'd had a large house when I came first with dormitories, and then people moved out into bungalows on a campus. So Clare would have been seen to be quite forward-thinking. I remember somebody said to me when I got the job, "Aren't you very lucky you're going to work in County Clare? Because really it's a state-of-the-art service." And because, as I said, I worked for the organisation for 36 years, so it's only in the last 10 years or so that I went, well, it was 13 years ago actually I went to Clare. I'd known everyone in Galway. It was like starting anew almost. It might be the same organisation, but I was working in a new county. And it meant I had to spend a lot of time meeting people and getting to know people, and just finding out what their lives were like. And to be honest, the story was pretty grim. People weren't happy. They didn't have any money. They didn't like the work they did. They didn't like the people they worked with a lot of the time. They didn't like their staff in the group homes. They often didn't get on very well with the people they lived with. And in general, people just told me they wanted friends, they wanted money, they wanted a home of their own, they wanted real work, and they wanted to live in real places. So I realised straight away I had a pretty big task on my hands if I was to try and make the difference that I'd set out as a 21-year-old trying to do, and began to realise I'd wasted a lot of years, and it was really just, well, what next, and just how are we going to go about this? I think in 2000 we had approximately 20 group homes with 5, maybe 6 people living in each house. And as I said to you, I was meeting people and people were not happy. They did not have good lives. And in particular, there were 2 areas in the county where I was getting a lot of pressure from families. Obviously, they knew Clare was now an autonomous region. They had a chief executive. And I had a lot of phone calls from families saying to me, you know, we've no service in East Clare, we've no service in Shannon. You might have heard of Shannon because we have an airport there and it's kind of a well-known area of Clare. And basically families were asking me if I would organise to have a day centre built and open up a group home or 2 in those areas. I remember one mother in particular from East Clare phoning me and asking me this, and I said, you know, I don't really know. I hear what you're saying. She said, when my daughter leaves school, she will need a day service and she will need a group home. And I said, well, people here aren't particularly happy with what we've been providing. We want to do things differently. I'm not sure what it's going to look like, but would you mind bearing with us and we'll see what we can do to make things different, and I'll get back to you. So as time went on, I suppose we started out in innocence, if you like. It's often a challenge to make a new beginning, but we realised that many of the people, like myself, had maybe come from an occupational therapy background or a nursing background, and we realised we weren't really the best people. We weren't as steeped in community as others, perhaps. And we realised that we needed people who are out there immersed in community, making things happen. A little bit like if we look back at what Tim talked about this morning. And we needed people who were self-starters and could get things moving for people. And so we took a step, we put an ad in the paper, and we looked for 2 people, one for the Shannon area and one for East Clare. And we wrote the ad quite differently. We said, look, we're really looking for can-do people. We want to support people in their own communities with their own families in the Shannon area and the East Clare area. And if you're interested, we'd like to hear from you. And what happened was Martina and Richard came to work with us, 2 fantastic people who all their lives had been involved in community. Martina happened to have a master's degree in community and development, but apart from that, she was just steeped herself, and her family were steeped in community. And they took on the jobs, and a couple of things began to happen immediately, which were amazing to us, because first of all, we had phone calls from both communities. The Respond community in Shannon, who support families and community members, phoned us and they said, "We saw your ad in the paper. We have some offices down here, and if you need an office space, we'd be delighted if you would like to work with us." And in East Clare, something similar happened. The local community development centre phoned us, and they said to us, "Well, we're delighted you're coming to work in the community." Now, it was interesting because people thought that the services in Clare were absolutely immersed in community. So, because we didn't have a campus or anything. But the other thing that happened was that one of the parents who'd put a lot of pressure on me to build the group home and build a day centre, she phoned and she said, "Thank you for keeping your promise," but she said, "I never really dreamt it could be something like this." And immediately she said, "Look, if there's something to be done, I'd like to be involved." So before we knew it, you know, we had the two coordinators we employed working in the heart of community, where we'd always wanted to work alongside other people who were involved in community, but it had been hard for us, if you like, to get in. And the other thing that Martina said to us was, because she worked with the Community Development Project, and she said, "You know," she said, "in my work, we work with different target groups, we call them, in community." And she said, "Every year we'd have to make our returns to the Department for Community and Rural Development." And she said, "We did very well in every area, except when it came to people with intellectual disability." She said, "We didn't score very well," she said, "because we couldn't find them." Now remember, you know, we weren't running a large institution and a special campus. These were ordinary houses in ordinary housing estates, and that was the reaction of people from community. So, in a sense, it's sometimes, you know, it's almost in an innocent way, you begin to be seduced into growth, if you like, because that's what happened to us. It was only when I later met Michael Kendrick and we began to tell him our story that he said to us, yes, he said, "When you get outside the four walls of service and you begin to work in real places," he said, "then," he said, "you'll see the little miracles." And that's what was happening. The other thing we knew we needed, because this was new territory for us, and we felt we need something to guide us, and we knew we needed a vision. But we didn't need a vision statement on a wall. We needed something that was going to keep us really, remember, we're here running services that are very segregated and congregated, and at the same time, in East Clare and Shannon, we're starting to do things differently. Little miracles are happening. And then in the meantime, new people we were asked to support new people. Sometimes they ended up going into the workshop. Sometimes they were from Scariff or Shannon, and so they were supported in a different way. And to say the least, it was confusing. So we knew we needed to have a vision. So we looked at a vision for a good life, a universal vision, which we all share and we've heard a lot about today. It's happiness, freedom, health, and prosperity for all. And then we felt, well, we need something, a one-liner for us that we can keep in our hearts to remind us every day. So no matter what it is we're going to do, whatever decision we make, whatever we decide to do next, that we will stay true to the universal vision. So the vision we came up with was love and respect for all towards a full and valued life. And of course, by love, I mean relationships. And we've heard a lot about it today. And I often say, you know, that our families love us. We'll do anything for our family member. As paid staff, though, we don't necessarily, yes, we sometimes do meet people who do love us. But by and large, if you're working in an organisation, and like in County Clare, and you're supporting hundreds of adults, the reality is you don't love everyone. And therefore, we often drop the ball for people. So we realised that while we personally couldn't take on the task of loving everyone, it was beholden to us to begin to support people to form relationships, to be far more connected with their family, because many of them had not been involved with them for many years. And from now on, our duty was never again to take people away from where they were loved and cared for so much. So love and respect. And respect is to look again at the person. If you break down the word, re means again, spect means to look again and see the real person. Too often we have perceptions of, oh, here's so-and-so, he's always in a bad mood on a Monday, you know, I'll have to get away from him as quick as I can. Or we have these perceptions of people, even of, you know, people in our own neighbourhood sometimes. But if we look again and we really see the unique person and people's gifts and talents, and sadly in congregated settings, particularly in large workshops, you walk in and what do you see? You see 110 people in a workshop. You see disability. You don't see the real people. And one of the people I've worked with, Phil, she was the manager of the actual workshop. She was assistant to the area manager, but she was the manager of the workshop in Ennis that had 110 people. And she said to me, she moved on in her job then to actually support 32 people who had their own homes and who were either going to college or had jobs or whatever. This is about 4 years ago. So it was a big change for her over the 6-year period to move from one situation to another. But she said, you know, when I was in charge of the workshop, she said, I thought I knew everyone. And I always thought when they were going home in the evening, I knew what kind of a day they'd had. She said, now that everybody is out and about all over the place, she said, I know exactly if something is not right for people. They'll be on the mobile to me or they'll be in to see me and I'll know all about it. She said, before when they were in the workshop, I really hadn't a clue what went on for them all day. So love and respect for all, and of course it's for everyone, because if we don't respect each other, we won't respect others. So it's so important for us that we really take up this challenge of looking again at seeing each unique person for their strengths and talents towards a full and valued life. So that's to be there, as people told me, they wanted a real life in a real place for real money and to be valued. So if somebody wasn't around tomorrow, we'd really, really miss them for the difference they'd made to all of our lives. It was important as well for us that our vision, as I said, was held in our hearts and minds. And I'd say there were often days at work, particularly in the early days of change, that I probably, you know, repeated that vision 40 times over, because we used it as a measure almost. In a sense, it contained a lot of our values. And it was around this time that I met Michael Kendrick. He was speaking at a conference in Limerick, and I went down and listened to him. And at the end of his presentation, he said, there are a lot of areas around the world, he said, where really good things are happening. And if anyone is interested, I can let you know where. So I went up to him afterwards, I joined the queue. And when I got to him, he said to me, yeah, he said, email me. He said, it's in the handout. My email address is in the handout. So I went back to a very good colleague of mine, Mary Rowan. And Mary is our training and development manager. And I said to Mary, would you mind following up with Michael Kendrick and finding out where we can really find these great places where really good things are happening? So it took her several months, and I remember she phoned me one Friday evening and she said, you won't believe it, Michael Kendrick's in Ireland. And I said, go away. And she said, yeah. And she said, I said, well, where is he? She said, he's in Dublin. And I said, well, would he see us? And she said, well, I'll be back to you, I'll email him again. So next thing he said, yeah, I can see you at 10:30 in the morning in the Westbury Hotel. So you can imagine this is the west of Ireland, 10:30 the next morning in Dublin. And I said to Mary, well, I'll go. And she said, well, I'll be with you. And the two of us we went up to see Michael, and we came out 2.5 hours later. And this is the truth. I remember we both stood in Grafton Street, and he mentioned people like Deb Rouget, Pat Fratangelo in Syracuse, Janet Cleese, and we'd never heard of any of these people before. Mary and I were furiously writing notes, taking down email addresses and all the rest of it. And, you know, we told him our story and how we were getting on, and he was really interested. And we said, look, will you help us? And he said, I will. But I remember we stood out in Grafton Street afterwards and we looked at each other and we said, just imagine no group homes in the future. And that's how innocent we were, you know. Today in County Clare, I think there are 2 group homes still remaining. One has 4 people in it and the other, I think, has 2 or 3. I've retired since Christmas, so I'm a small little bit out of touch, but it took us, we met Michael in 2006. So, or maybe 2005. It took us a few years to, well, first of all, you know, begin to do things differently, start finding our way, start getting in touch with everybody he introduced us to. So a lot has happened in the meantime, but I just want to, you know, pay tribute to him and to all the people who've helped us on the way, because we've learned from everyone. I'd say we went out, we begged, borrowed and stole every idea we could find to help us, because it's a tough journey. We were stepping into the unknown, and if we had to wait to do it all ourselves, we just wouldn't, you know. Pat Fratangelo says we never get there, and that's true, but definitely you can take shortcuts by finding out from others who've gone this road before you, and that's one thing, wonderful thing about this work, is that you do make great friends and people are so willing to share. So hopefully I can share a little of what we've learned on the way with you today. There's an Irish writer, he was from County Clare. Sadly, he passed away a few weeks after he wrote his book, Benedictus. It's a book of blessings. But he's just the most wonderful writer. But he says, we have fallen out of belonging. He says, to be, we need to be home. When a place to belong is assured, then the adventure of growth can begin with great promise. And I just share some of the stories with you today and some of the things we try to do to make things a little bit differently. So one of the first things, as I said, we started in Scariff, and Joe and Brian, a business came up in Scariff. Richard, who went to work in Scariff, joined the local community steering group, and Joe, who's got his hand wiping the table there, Joe joined the steering committee with Richard, and different things began to happen in Scariff, and Joe and Brian just started to be part of everything that went on. They had previously attended the workshop in Ennis. And the co-op one day said, you know, we've got a coffee shop and we'd like somebody to rent the coffee shop. The rent will be cheap. There won't be a huge income out of it, but we're really looking for somebody to run it. And Joe and Brian said, well, look, we'll have a go at it. They both had part-time jobs at this stage. So I'm probably moving on a year or two after they'd moved from the workshop. Both had got part-time jobs, but they still had part-time with not a lot to do. So they began to job share, if you like, and run the coffee shop. And it was an interesting experience, because coming from our services and being supported by us, they still saw that the Brothers of Charity would tell them what to do, and if they were going to have this business, that we'd sort of show them how to do it. And around this time as well, Professor Kealy Johnson from Australia, who is one of the world leaders in inclusive research, she happened to come to Trinity College in Dublin on a Marie Curie scholarship and fellowship. And they contacted us from Trinity and they said, look, we hear you doing things differently. Would you like Kealy to go and work with you in County Clare and perhaps show people with disability how to do their own research? And of course, we were delighted at this chance. Kealy came down, she met everyone, she went around, I'd say she spent weeks touring Clare, meeting all the different people we supported wherever they were at. And when she met Joe, Joe said, look, I'd really like to do some research on the coffee shop. And Kealy went on then to support them to publish their research. So I have here with me Joe and Brian and Joe's coffee shop. And Joe says, I'm not going to go into much detail, but just to give you an idea, Joe said, when Kealy met him, he said, I'd really like to do some research on the coffee shop. He said, because I'd like to see how the community feel about it, what does it do well, and what could it do better. And he said, the other thing is, he said, I worked for years in a workshop, because he'd worked in a workshop before he even came to Clare, to the brothers. And he said, it wasn't a great experience, and he said, I'd like other people to know about how people with disability can run their own business. But the beginning was, not that easy. As in Brian's words, talking about it, he said, we started off with a cash box. He said, then with help, I got a grant to buy a till that was easy to see. I found it hard to manage the till and stuff like that. Lots of things I hadn't done before. Money and the working of it was hard. Print on the till was too small. I contacted the serviceman in Ennis myself, and he came out. He printed up bigger stickers. Writing the checks was hard because I never done it before. I got people in the shop to spell out the words for me. So you begin to see how moving from, previously we'd always thought we would train people in the workshop and then we'd have it all sorted and people would go out and get jobs. And of course that never happened. So suddenly people are out running their own business, having to make do. I remember Joe and Brian told me one day they were short. Brian couldn't come in one afternoon. So Joe was working that morning and he said, we have a problem this afternoon. We've nobody to run the coffee shop. And one of the people in the shop said, I'll volunteer. I'll run the shop this afternoon. So, as Joe says in the book, we got good volunteers. I always say one thing leads to another. I suppose it's like that in all our lives, on our life's journey. Something happens, then something else happens, and that's how our life develops and grows. Another thing that happened was that Brian said, we went to Galway to meet a man from Costa Rica who grows his own coffee. He told us about fair trade, and he showed us some of his coffee. After we met him, we decided to sell fair trade. So it goes on then, and the book later, in this, they interview different people who are involved in the coffee shop, apart from people in the community who are benefiting from coming in every day. They said that they began to have fundraising nights. And then it goes on to talk about the musical nights they had. And then it talks about a local man who was injured, and they ran a fundraising night for him. So you begin to see what came out of two guys setting up a business. As it happens, after a while, Brian decided he got full-time employment at the Mart. He said he was fed up at the coffee shop, and Joe was happy to run it himself. Interestingly enough, Joe got another job eventually, and he decided to give up the coffee shop. And they had a friend who, in the community, who said, look, I'll take over the coffee shop. So it's been, the way a lot of things do, a lot of us, we move on from one thing to another. If you compare that back to people in a workshop, it's often happened to me in my career. You walk in 5 years later, people are still sitting at the same place doing the same work. So from Michael, our meeting with Michael then, he encouraged us, he explained to us, in a sense I suppose it was almost by default that things were starting to change for us in community settings. But back at the workshop and back working with group homes, things weren't much different, and we were struggling to know what to do next. So then he suggested to us that we work one person at a time. And that's exactly what we started to do. I couldn't emphasize enough, I suppose, the importance of that, because it was then that we began to realize that, as I said to you, when new people were referred to us, they were coming in again to the workshop. I remember the manager saying to me one day, he said, great things are happening, people move out and good things happen in their lives, but then we start all over again with somebody else. And we realized then from there on in that let's just, anymore, if we were asked, because what happened to us is we're funded by our HSE, it's called the Health Services Executive. So they will come to us and ask us to support somebody. Now what used to happen is we'd get their money, and their money went into our services, the system. And then we had to scramble to get the money out and begin to support the person in a different way. So we just essentially began to change the way we did things. You'll notice I'm not talking about family so far, because we hadn't got there yet at all ourselves. We were struggling to change the way we were working ourselves for years and years. So we began to work one person at a time. It also took courage, because the HSE weren't quite sure what we were at. I remember two brothers who'd lost their family, their parents. They were estranged from most of their siblings. We were asked to support them, and we helped them find a house. And they just loved the house. They wanted to live near the sea, and they moved in. And when the HSE heard that they weren't in a group home, they took the funding away from us, and they gave it to an organisation that was running a campus that had hundreds of houses on a campus. And it was shocking. And so it required a lot of courage to stay going, not to give up, and to finally get these people on board. It's funny, a turning point with the HSE was a couple of years later, Michael Kendrick ran a service transformation event in Asheville in the States, and we got one of the people from the HSE to come with us. And I remember she turned to me during it and she said, you know, I was sort of with you on the plane coming over, but she said, now I'll be behind you all the way. And a few weeks later, when we got home, she rang me one day and she said, there's a man who's been living in a mental health unit for the last 18 months. She said, he is nowhere to go. The psychiatrist is saying to me, he doesn't have an he has an intellectual disability. He should be with the Brothers of Charity, and he's holding up a bed in me, and I want him out tomorrow. And she said, I've written a letter to him. She said, to tell him that you don't do things like that anymore, that you do things differently. And I've explained that you'll need time to get to know this man, and that he might like a home of his own, and that he might like to get a job. And she said, can I read you the letter? And will you let me know how I should reword it? And when she read the letter to me, I was so moved. I said, you know, I couldn't write it any better myself. And we did get to know that man. And he does have his own home now, and he does have full-time work. And he has never looked back. In fact, he's never been next nor near the mental health services since. And I think it probably took about 2 months by the time, you know, he found his house and all the rest of it. So, robust recruitment, I've more or less referred to that already, because, as I said, we looked for people who could make things happen for people, who didn't necessarily come from a medical background. Sometimes by chance people happen to have a medical background, but that wasn't the reason they were recruited. The other thing we began to do as well is we began to, apart of course, the fact that people themselves were involved in hiring their own staff and families were involved, we began then to have evenings where we made a presentation about what our values were and what our principles were and what we believed in. And we said to people, this is the type of support we can offer you. And if that's maybe not what you're looking for, if you're looking for a more traditional service, we were able to refer them on to others. But in fact, that never really happened, that anyone most people said no, they were, you know, happy enough to be supported by the brothers. I've 5 minutes left, so I'm going to go quickly through other things. But eventually, anyway, we began to meet a lot of people who supported us a lot. Michael ran the OISD training. I know that he's been here several times, so probably everyone knows about it, but it's the optimal individualized service design, and he brings a co-presenter with him. So that's somebody who's worked in a service usually, or it can be a family member, but often it's a service provider who has led the organisation through change so that they can share their experience with the organisation he's working with. And so when he came to us to run this course, the first time Pat Fratangelo came, the second time Janet Cleese came, and we began to make friends with people in other organisations who we are totally indebted to. But what happened then was he began to say to us, well, the next stage of your journey, you really need to start looking at having families more involved. So it was because of that that, in fact, I came to Australia. I took annual leave myself. I came to Australia when there was an international leadership exchange conference on in 2009, and Michael led me to Deb Rouget. And to be honest, I didn't know the first thing about family leadership when I came here. And Deb introduced me to many family members. And I remember saying to her one day, you know, Deb, I've just realized something. I said, it's been the one person at a time strategy that has really helped us, I said, to make changes in our everyday, the way we support people. But I said, I've now realized something. I said, we were inviting groups of families in for training, because of course we were getting lots of exposure and lots of training, but we weren't sharing this with families. So I said, when we do this, I said, we invite large groups of families, but I said, they hardly ever turn up, or if they do, they don't come again. And I said, I've just realized something. We've been doing the same thing to families that really we had been doing to the people we were supporting. So, you know, I think it's one family at a time. And Deb said, yes, she said, now you're getting there. And I left here then and I went to Brisbane and I went to an organisation called MAMRE. A MAMRE, or a family-led organisation. I had 2 days there and it just opened my eyes. But to go back to when I met Pat Fratangelo, when Pat Fratangelo came to Ireland to work with us for a week, she said to me when she was leaving, you know, Mary, how about a staff exchange? So we organised for somebody, one of the people who managed with us in Clare, to go to Syracuse, and he worked there for 6 weeks. And meanwhile, a very experienced manager came to work with us. Lauren was her name, and she was absolutely brilliant. So that worked really, really well for us. So after I came here then, and I went to MAMRE, I realised there was no way that I could go home after 2 days and share everything with them at home. And I realised the importance of family leadership. And I realised that if we really, really were going to make things happen for people, we would have to employ a family leader, as Deb had advised me, but also we were going to have to really get some experience. So I asked Martina to come out to MAMRE, and she did, and she worked there for 4 months. And just to give you a flavour of what it's like, I'm going to read the email from her that she sent me after her first day. MAMRE is in Brisbane, for those who don't know. She said, hi Mary, I started today at MAMRE, and it was just fab. I had a welcome committee waiting my arrival, and morning tea with cake, cream and strawberries at 10 o'clock. Such a nice environment. Catherine spent a lot of the day with me, filling me in on the background of MAMRE, values and principles. I've loads of interesting literature and already have some suggested changes when I go home. Recruitment. Here they place an ad in the paper and invite interested candidates to come to an informal session over finger food. They watch how people interact, and after giving them a good chat around values and principles, invite those interested to proceed to fill in an application. She said, parent programs. This is where they organise social events for parents and to take care of the children at home, which includes a child with a disability. Through these social events, parents get talking and leadership skills are developed. Catherine and the others use these opportunities to help families to build visions for their sons and daughters. Third bullet point, there are a series of indicators to indicate if a support worker is doing a good job in supporting a person around valued social roles. Informal supports developed and independent skills required. These probably should be core areas, and all the support workers should have to concentrate on and support people in achieving. And that was only day one. Are you sure it was a good idea to send me here? I have some stuff on family managed services, which, sorry, I just can't read this. Each person has their own cost centre. They have developed a software package to do this. So I'm going to meet with the business manager and get all the particulars on this. Catherine said they would share the package with us. So that was day one. Can't wait until tomorrow. that's just an idea of the benefit. We later did go on to have families go and exchange. But when Martina came back then, we were fortunate enough to get funding, and we ran our first family leadership program. I'm speaking tomorrow, and I'm going to be going into the details of all that, just about people getting their own home as well. Obviously, we didn't get any extra money to make this change. Gradually, one person at a time, people began to leave group homes. Michael Kendrick warned me, he said, nothing closes till the last person leaves. So we didn't go around saying we're closing the workshop or we're closing a group home. We literally did abide by that rule. Nothing closed till the last person left. But again, I'll talk more about it tomorrow, but just so you know, in case somebody won't be here, we, in more recent years, developed this imaginative living options. So it's got all the tips, the things we picked up on the way of how to find a housemate for somebody, how to interview people, a contract, so everything you kind of need to know is there, and I also have it on my laptop. So if you're interested in it, I will email it to Deb, and Deb can let you have it, but if you just want to look at the package. I suppose, to go back to values, as I said, our values were very important. So when Janet Cleese was over, she said something to us that really resounded with us. She said, we need to have SRV at the kitchen table. So it was then we came to know and learn about social role valorisation. I know John Armstrong's here today. I know Martin Elks will be here. He's married to Darcy, another one of my teachers in SRV. So we began to learn about SRV. We had people come over to Ireland to teach us about it. And as I said, we used SRV then when we ran our family leadership, and even when we were interviewing or inviting families to be supported, for their family member to be supported by us. We always, Mary Rowan and I designed our own mini package, 3-hour long values and principles workshop. And we ran that for everybody who came to work with us, as I said, or any family member, anyone who became involved with the organisation. That was essential, that they attended that. As I said, the timing and the sharing and all we learn from people, it's just how we got to where we are today is through all the help that we got from others. And in return, anything we managed to develop ourselves, we've managed to give back a little. Finally, I'd just like to say to close, it's not easy setting out. You're not sure where you're going. But to go back to John O'Donoghue, it's his last book. So when it's your somebody's last book, you read every bit of it. And when I read the acknowledgements at the back of the book, John O'Donoghue paid tribute to his father, and I just really liked what he said about him. He said, his gentle eyes were always in love with the unseen. And I think that that's very important for us. We have to fall in love with the unseen in order to give us courage to make a new beginning. Thank you very much.